The desert wind carved silence across the forward operating base as Lieutenant Commander Cassandra Phoenix Voss stepped from the transport helicopter, her flight bag slung over one shoulder like she owned the place. The SEALs clustered near the hangar didn't bother hiding their skeptical glances. Word had already spread through the base like wildfire. Some Navy pilot was being fast-tracked into their operation, and she wasn't what they expected. Team leader Marcus Reaper Kane watched her approach through polarized sunglasses, his jaw working a piece of gum with mechanical precision. 23 years in special operations had taught him to read people in seconds, and this woman didn't fit the usual profile. Too composed, too comfortable in her own skin. The kind of confidence that either came from extensive combat experience or dangerous delusion. "That's our ace pilot," whispered Petty Officer Rodriguez, adjusting his gear vest. "Looks like she just stepped out of a recruitment poster." Kane held up a hand, silencing the murmurs. The mission brief had been cryptic, high-value target extraction in hostile territory, requiring precision flying through mountain passes that had claimed 3 aircraft in the past month. Command insisted on this particular pilot, but her service record was mostly redacted. Black ink covered everything except her call sign and current rank. Voss approached their cluster with measured steps, her olive-green flight suit pristine despite the cross-country transport. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, revealing sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of winter storms. When she spoke, her voice carried the flat authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Gentlemen, I'm Phoenix. I'll be providing close air support and extraction for Operation Blackwater." She dropped her bag and pulled out a tablet, swiping through mission parameters with practiced efficiency. Weather window opens at 300. Target LZ is a postage stamp surrounded by hostiles with modern air defense systems. Kane stepped forward, crossing his arms. "With respect, ma'am, this isn't a training exercise. We've lost good people in those mountains. My team needs to know we can count on our pilot when things go sideways." Phoenix looked up from her tablet, meeting his gaze without flinching. Something flickered in her expression, not anger, but a deep weariness that seemed decades older than her apparent age. "I understand your concerns, Reaper, but I'm not here to prove myself to you. I'm here to bring you home." The confidence in her voice should have been reassuring, but Kane felt an odd chill instead. The briefing tent buzzed with nervous energy as classified imagery flickered across multiple screens. Phoenix stood at the front, laser pointer dancing across topographical maps that looked more like abstract art than navigable terrain. The mountain passes twisted through elevations that made experienced pilots question their career choices, and weather patterns shifted with the unpredictability of a bipolar deity. "Primary insertion point is here." Phoenix indicated a narrow valley squeezed between peaks that scraped 14,000 feet. 60-second window for fast rope deployment before were exposed to radar coverage from the northern ridgeline. Sergeant First Class Tank Morrison, built like his nickname suggested, raised a scarred hand. "What's our backup if the weather socks us in?" Phoenix's finger traced an alternative route through even more treacherous terrain. "Emergency LZ Delta 7. It's a ledge barely wide enough for landing skids, but it'll keep us below the cloud ceiling." She paused, studying the faces around her. "I won't lie to you. This isn't a milk run, but I've flown worse." Kane noticed how she said it, not with bravado, but with the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating an uncomfortable truth. "Care to elaborate on that combat experience, Phoenix?" For the first time, her composure cracked slightly. She set down the laser pointer and looked directly at each team member. "My service record speaks for itself, gentlemen. What matters is getting you to the target and bringing everyone home in one piece." "Redacted service records don't speak to anything," muttered Rodriguez under his breath. Phoenix heard him. She always heard everything. "Petty officer, would you prefer I regale you with war stories, Or would you rather focus on the fact that your extraction depends on split-second timing through a corridor that's killed 3 crews this month? The tent fell silent except for the constant hum of generators outside. Kane studied her carefully, noting how her hands remained steady despite the obvious tension. Most pilots would be sweating bullets at this point, but Phoenix looked like she was discussing grocery shopping. "Fair enough," Kane said finally. "But understand something, Phoenix. My team's been through hell together. We don't know you, which means we don't trust you. Yet." Phoenix nodded slowly, something like approval flickering in her expression. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Reaper. Trust is earned, not assigned." She clicked to the next slide, showing real-time satellite imagery of their target compound. "But tonight, all you need to trust is that I know these mountains better than anyone else breathing." Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the imagery with professional interest. "How can you be so sure?" Phoenix's smile held secrets that would haunt his dreams. "Because I helped map them." The pre-dawn darkness felt heavy with unspoken tension as the team conducted final equipment checks. Phoenix moved through her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision of a surgeon, her hands tracing familiar paths across control surfaces and weapon systems. The MH-6 Little Bird crouched on the tarmac like a predatory insect, its sleek profile designed for exactly this type of mission. Kane watched from a distance, still trying to reconcile the woman before him with the redacted file on his desk. Something about her movements suggested muscle memory earned through repetition under stress, the kind that only came from extensive combat operations. But if she'd seen that much action, why weren't there records? Why the mystery? "Phoenix, comms check," came the voice of flight operations over the radio. She keyed her mic without looking up from her inspection. "Phoenix copies all. Aircraft systems green, weather looks manageable. Ready for spin-up in 15 mics." Her voice over the radio carried a different quality than in person, crisp, professional, with an underlying current of absolute authority. Kane had heard that tone before, from pilots who'd been shot at so many times they considered it routine maintenance. Tank approached, hefting his gear with the casual strength of someone who'd been carrying heavy loads since boot camp. "Ma'am, got a question about extraction timing. If we're compromised at the target, what's our contingency?" Phoenix looked up from her checklist, studying Tank's earnest expression. "Depends on the nature of the compromise. Combat extraction protocols are different from stealth withdrawal. I'll have overwatch from altitude. If things go loud, I can provide close air support while you move to emergency pickup points." "What kind of close air support?" Rodriguez asked, joining the conversation. "That bird's not exactly a gunship." Phoenix patted the weapon pylons mounted on either side of the cockpit. "Hellfire missiles and a .30 caliber gun system. Not as impressive as an Apache, but sufficient for most threats you're likely to encounter." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "I've provided CAS in much more challenging environments with much less capable aircraft." The casual way she mentioned Hellfire missiles, like discussing coffee preferences, sent another chill down Kane's spine. Most pilots treated those weapons with appropriate reverence. Phoenix spoke about them like familiar tools. "Time to spin up," she announced, climbing into the cockpit with fluid efficiency. "Mount up, gentlemen. We've got a narrow weather window, and I'd prefer not to explain to your wives why we missed it." As the turbine engines began their characteristic whine, Kane strapped himself into the cramped passenger compartment and tried to shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial about their pilot. The little bird lifted off with barely a tremor, Phoenix's touch on the controls so smooth that gravity seemed negotiable. Kane had flown with dozens of pilots over his career, from steady professionals to adrenaline-junkie cowboys, but he'd never experienced anything quite like this. Phoenix flew the helicopter like it was an extension of her nervous system, responding to minute atmospheric changes before they registered on instruments. "Passing through 8,000 feet," her voice crackled over the intercom. Weather's cooperating so far. Visibility adequate, winds within parameters. Through the curved windscreen, Kane watched the landscape transform from desert scrub to rocky foothills to the knife-edge ridgelines that defined this particular corner of hell. The mountains rose around them like ancient monuments to violence, their peaks shrouded in clouds that shifted constantly in the pre-dawn light. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch," came a new voice over the radio, their drone operator providing real-time intelligence. "Showing clear corridors through your intended route. No thermal signatures in the immediate area." "Copy Overwatch. Maintaining current heading and altitude." Phoenix banked left into a valley so narrow that Kane could have touched the rocky walls by extending his arms. The helicopter's rotor wash echoed off stone surfaces, creating an acoustic signature that would be audible for miles. But Phoenix seemed unconcerned, maintaining airspeed and altitude with the confidence of someone who'd done this exact maneuver countless times. Tank leaned forward, shouting over engine noise. "How the hell do you know these routes so well?" Phoenix didn't answer immediately, her attention focused on threading the needle between two particularly unforgiving peaks. When she finally responded, her voice carried an odd note of nostalgia. "I spent a lot of time in these mountains, Tank. Different war, same geography." Rodriguez exchanged glances with Kane. Different war. Phoenix looked too young to have significant combat experience in previous conflicts, but her flying suggested otherwise. The way she anticipated wind shear, adjusted for altitude effects, compensated for the helicopter's changing weight distribution. These were skills developed through extensive operational experience. "Coming up on the insertion point," Phoenix announced. 60 seconds to fast rope. Weather's holding, no hostile activity detected. This is going to be a textbook insertion, gentlemen." Kane checked his gear one final time, but couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about this mission would prove textbook. Not with Phoenix at the controls, carrying secrets that felt heavier than ammunition. The fast rope insertion went flawlessly, Phoenix holding the little bird in a perfect hover while wind gusts that should have destabilized the aircraft barely registered as minor course corrections. Kane hit the ground running, his team dispersing into predetermined positions with the fluid efficiency of operators who'd worked together for years. Above them, Phoenix pulled pitch and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, her navigation lights blinking out as she transitioned to stealth configuration. "Phoenix is clear of insertion zone," her voice whispered through their earpieces. "Establishing Overwatch position. I've got eyes on your objective and clear sight lines for extraction support." Kane pressed himself against a boulder outcropping, studying the target compound through night vision optics. Intelligence had been accurate, a fortified position carved into the mountainside, with clear fields of fire covering all approaches except the narrow goat path they'd just descended. Getting inside would require precise timing and more luck than Kane preferred to rely on. "Reaper, this is Phoenix," came the quiet voice in his ear. "Thermal imaging shows 4 sentries on the perimeter, 2 more inside the main structure. Patrol pattern suggests they're not expecting company." Kane keyed his mic twice in acknowledgement, then hand-signaled his team into position. Tank and Rodriguez would provide overwatch while Kane penetrated the compound. Simple plan, minimal variables, exactly the kind of operation that usually went sideways in spectacular fashion. The approach took 40 minutes of careful movement across terrain that seemed designed to break ankles and announce presence to anyone within 10 miles. But Kane had learned patience through repeated exposure to situations where impatience meant death, and his team moved like shadows across the rocky landscape. "Reaper Phoenix, showing movement on your 6 o'clock, approximately 800 meters, single individual moving toward your position." Kane froze, pressing himself deeper into available cover. 800 meters was close enough for someone with decent optics to spot their movement, but far enough away to potentially avoid detection if they remained motionless. Can you identify the contact? Kane whispered into his mic. Negative on identification. Individual appears to be conducting routine patrol, not search behavior. Recommend holding position for 2 minutes while contact moves through the area. Kane signaled his team to freeze, watching Tank and Rodriguez blend into the landscape with the practiced ease of operators who'd survived multiple deployments. Phoenix's voice in his ear carried the calm professionalism of someone providing overwatch from a position of tactical advantage. 2 minutes stretched into eternity, measured in heartbeats and shallow breathing, before Phoenix's voice returned. Contact is clear. You're good to continue approach. The compound's outer perimeter consisted of ancient stone walls reinforced with modern defensive positions. Kane identified weak points in the defensive layout, noting how shadows fell across specific approaches that would allow infiltration without exposure to sentry positions. Phoenix had been right about the patrol patterns. Whoever planned this defensive setup understood the terrain, but underestimated the capabilities of professional operators. In position for breach, Kane whispered. Request final reconnaissance. Reaper, Phoenix. All sentries accounted for, no change in thermal signatures. You have approximately 12 minutes before the next scheduled radio check, based on communication patterns I've been monitoring. Kane paused, processing that information. Phoenix had been monitoring enemy communication patterns. That level of intelligence gathering suggested capabilities beyond standard close air support. Most pilots focused on navigation and immediate tactical support, not comprehensive signals intelligence. Copy Phoenix, beginning infiltration. The breach went smoothly until it didn't. Kane had just cleared the outer wall when automatic weapons fire erupted from positions that hadn't appeared on any reconnaissance imagery. Muzzle flashes lit up the pre-dawn darkness like deadly fireworks, and the distinctive crack of high-velocity rounds split the mountain air. Contact, contact, Kane shouted into his mic, diving for cover as bullets chewed up the stone around him. Multiple hostiles concealed positions. Request immediate support. Phoenix's response was instantaneous. Reaper, I have eyes on hostile positions. Danger close fire support available on your command. Kane pressed himself against a crumbling wall section, assessing the tactical situation with the rapid calculation that kept special operators alive. His team was pinned down by at least 6 combatants in prepared positions, with limited cover and no clear withdrawal route. Standard doctrine called for air support, but Phoenix's aircraft wasn't designed for close air support in urban environments. Phoenix, can you engage without risk to civilians? Negative civilians in target area. Multiple thermal signatures consistent with armed combatants. I can provide precision engagement if you can mark targets. Kane pulled an infrared strobe from his gear, activating the device and placing it to mark his position. Friendlies marked with IR strobe. Hostiles are north and east of my position, approximately 50 meters. Reaper, Phoenix. I have your strobe and thermal signatures on hostile positions. Recommend you keep your heads down for the next 30 seconds. Kane had worked with air support before, but he'd never heard a pilot sound quite so calm while preparing to engage targets in close proximity to friendly forces. Most aviators carried tension in their voices during combat operations, but Phoenix sounded like she was conducting a routine training exercise. The first Hellfire missile struck with surgical precision, eliminating a machine gun position that had been pouring fire into Kane's location. The explosion echoed off mountain walls, followed immediately by the distinctive whine of Phoenix's aircraft diving for a gun run. Phoenix engaging with .30 caliber. Keep your heads down, Reaper. The gun run was a thing of beauty, each burst of automatic fire precisely placed to neutralize hostile positions without endangering Kane's team. Phoenix flew the little bird through the narrow confines of the compound with an aggressiveness that defied common sense, using terrain features to mask her approach and departure angles. Hostile positions neutralized, Phoenix reported, her voice still carrying that same unnatural calm. Reaper, you're clear to continue mission. Kane emerged from cover, surveying the tactical situation with professional appreciation. Phoenix had eliminated 6 hostile positions in under 2 minutes, with 0 collateral damage and minimal ammunition expenditure. That level of precision suggested combat experience far beyond what her apparent age should allow. Phoenix, outstanding work, continuing with objective. Copy Reaper, Overwatch maintained, I've got your back. The objective turned out to be more complicated than advertised. Intelligence had described a simple detention facility, but Kane found himself looking at a sophisticated command center carved deep into the mountainside. Computer terminals lined reinforced walls, communication equipment hummed with activity, and classified documents were scattered across multiple workstations. Reaper to Phoenix, objective is more complex than briefed, going to need additional time to process intelligence materials. Copy Reaper, time is becoming a factor. Monitoring increased radio chatter on hostile frequencies. Recommend expediting mission completion. Kane began photographing documents and downloading computer files, his training taking over despite the time pressure. Whatever operation was being conducted from this location, it was significantly more important than a simple detention facility. Maps showed positions throughout the region, and communication logs suggested coordination with multiple hostile elements. Reaper Phoenix, showing movement on multiple vectors. You've got company inbound from 3 directions. Estimate 15 minutes to contact. Kane's blood ran cold. 15 minutes wasn't enough time to complete intelligence gathering and reach the extraction point. Phoenix, can you delay inbound hostiles? Negative Reaper. Too many targets across too wide an area. Recommend emergency extraction procedures. Emergency extraction meant abandoning the intelligence gathering and moving immediately to the emergency landing zone. Kane made the decision with the rapid calculation that defined special operations. Partial mission success was better than total mission failure. Team Emergency Extraction. Move to LZ Delta 7 immediately. Tank and Rodriguez acknowledged, beginning movement toward the emergency extraction point with the disciplined haste of operators who understood that delays meant death. Kane completed downloading files from 2 computer terminals, then began his own movement toward the extraction zone. Phoenix, Reaper is moving to Delta 7. Request immediate extraction upon arrival. Copy Reaper, I'll be waiting. The movement to the emergency landing zone was a controlled retreat through terrain that seemed designed to punish haste. Kane led his team along ridgelines that offered concealment but required careful navigation, each step potentially the difference between successful extraction and catastrophic exposure. Phoenix Reaper, 5 minutes from LZ Delta 7. Copy Reaper. I'm in position and ready for immediate pickup. Weather's deteriorating but still within acceptable parameters. Kane could hear the change in Phoenix's voice, still professional, but with an underlying tension that suggested the tactical situation was becoming more complex. Through his night vision optics, he could see muzzle flashes in the valley below, indicating that hostile forces were beginning to converge on their general area. Phoenix Reaper, we're going to have company at the extraction zone. Multiple hostiles moving up the ridgeline from the south. Copy Reaper, I see them on thermal. 40+ individuals moving in coordinated fashion. This is going to be interesting. Kane reached the emergency landing zone, a rocky ledge barely 20 feet wide, carved out of the mountainside like a natural helicopter pad. Phoenix was already there, the little bird perched on the narrow space with its rotors spinning, ready for immediate departure. Mount up, move, move, Kane shouted, pushing his team toward the aircraft. As Tank and Rodriguez climbed aboard, automatic weapons fire erupted from positions below the landing zone. Phoenix responded instantly, lifting off while Kane was still climbing into the passenger compartment. Taking fire, Rodriguez shouted. Phoenix banked hard left, using the mountain's bulk to shield them from hostile fire while gaining altitude. The little bird climbed through air that seemed to grab at the aircraft with malicious intent, wind sheer threatening to slam them into rocky outcroppings. "Everyone secure," Phoenix called over the intercom. "We're good," Kane responded, finally strapping himself in. "Outstanding, now comes the fun part." Kane was about to ask what she meant when tracer rounds began streaking past their aircraft. Someone below had brought anti-aircraft weapons to the party. Phoenix's response was immediate and aggressive. She dove the little bird into a narrow canyon, using terrain masking to break contact with the anti-aircraft fire. The helicopter's engine screamed as she pushed the aircraft beyond normal operating parameters, trading altitude for speed while maintaining just enough clearance to avoid becoming a permanent fixture of the landscape. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch. Showing multiple surface-to-air missile launches from your vicinity. Recommend evasive maneuvers." "Copy, Overwatch. Kind of busy at the moment." Kane watched Phoenix work, her hands moving across controls with fluid precision while her eyes tracked multiple threats simultaneously. She was flying the little bird through a gauntlet that should have been impossible to navigate, threading between mountain peaks while avoiding missile lock-ons and anti-aircraft fire. "Missile launch! Missile launch!" Tank shouted, pointing at a contrail streaking toward their position. Phoenix didn't respond verbally, but the little bird suddenly inverted and dove toward the canyon floor. Kane felt his stomach attempt to relocate to his throat as the aircraft pulled negative GS, the missile streaking past close enough to see the fins stabilizing its flight path. "That was close," Rodriguez muttered. "Too close," Phoenix agreed, pulling the aircraft back to level flight. "But we're clear of the engagement zone. Smooth sailing from here." Kane looked back at the mountains receding behind them, still processing what he'd just experienced. Phoenix had flown them through a tactical situation that should have resulted in aircraft loss and crew fatalities, making it look like routine transportation. "Phoenix," Kane said over the intercom, "that was some impressive flying." "Just doing my job, Reaper." But Kane was beginning to suspect that Phoenix's job description was significantly more complex than anyone had briefed him. The return flight passed in relative silence, each team member processing the mission's events according to his own experience and training. Kane found himself studying Phoenix's profile in the cockpit, noting details he'd missed during the pre-mission briefing. Her hands moved across controls with the unconscious competence that came from extensive flight time under combat conditions, and her scan pattern suggested someone accustomed to threats from multiple vectors. "Phoenix, this is Overwatch. Outstanding work tonight. Mission parameters exceeded, all personnel accounted for, intelligence materials successfully recovered." "Copy, Overwatch. Just another day at the office." Kane keyed his mic. "Overwatch, Reaper. Phoenix provided exceptional close air support under extreme conditions. Recommend her for appropriate recognition." "Copy, Reaper. Phoenix's performance has been noted at the highest levels." There was something in Overwatch's tone that suggested Kane was missing crucial information about their pilot, but he couldn't identify what. Phoenix continued flying with the same steady competence she displayed throughout the mission, giving no indication that the night's events had been anything other than routine. "Approaching base airfield," Phoenix announced. "Landing in 5 minutes. Weather's clear, winds calm. Nice night for flying." Nice night for flying. Kane almost laughed. They'd been shot at by small arms, engaged multiple hostile positions, evaded surface-to-air missiles, and Phoenix described it as a nice night for flying. The landing was as smooth as the takeoff had been, Phoenix setting the little bird down on the designated spot with barely a bump. As the engine spun down, Kane began disconnecting his gear and preparing for debriefing, but Phoenix remained in the cockpit, completing post-flight procedures with methodical thoroughness. "Ma'am," Tank said as he climbed out of the aircraft, "that was some of the finest flying I've ever experienced." Phoenix looked up from her checklist, offering a slight smile. "Thank you, Tank. Glad we could bring everyone home safely." Rodriguez approached, carrying his gear bag and wearing an expression of newfound respect. "Phoenix, I owe you an apology. I had doubts about your capabilities before the mission." "Apology unnecessary, Rodriguez. Skepticism keeps operators alive. Tonight you learned you could trust me. That's what matters." Kane gathered his equipment but lingered near the aircraft. Something about Phoenix continued to bother him, not her competence, which had been demonstrated beyond question, but the mystery surrounding her background. Pilots with her demonstrated skill level didn't emerge from nowhere, and service records weren't redacted without significant reasons. "Phoenix," Kane said as she climbed down from the cockpit, "mind if I ask you something?" "Depends on the question, Reaper." "Where did you learn to fly like that?" Phoenix paused in securing her gear, considering her response carefully. "I've been flying for a long time, Reaper. Different aircraft, different missions, different wars. But the principles remain the same: know your aircraft, know your environment, and never stop learning." It wasn't really an answer, but Kane recognized the deflection of someone protecting classified information. He'd used similar techniques countless times when discussing his own operational background. "Fair enough, but if you ever want to share war stories over a beer, I'm buying." Phoenix's smile was genuine this time. "I might take you up on that, Reaper, assuming command approves." As Kane walked toward the debriefing facility, he couldn't shake the feeling that Phoenix's story was far more complex than anyone realized. The debriefing session stretched into the early morning hours, with intelligence officers dissecting every aspect of the mission in exhaustive detail. Kane provided tactical summaries, while Phoenix offered technical assessments of aircraft performance and enemy capabilities. Her reports were precise, professional, and revealed an understanding of intelligence analysis that went far beyond standard pilot training. "Phoenix," said Colonel Harrison, the base intelligence officer, "your assessment of enemy anti-aircraft capabilities is particularly insightful. Have you encountered similar systems in previous operations?" Phoenix looked up from her notes, meeting the colonel's gaze directly. "Yes, sir. Multiple times in various configurations and operational environments." "Can you elaborate on those encounters?" "I'm afraid those operations remain classified above your current clearance level, Colonel." The room fell silent. Kane had never heard a lieutenant commander tell a full colonel that his clearance was insufficient for discussion, and the casual way Phoenix delivered the statement suggested she'd done it before. Colonel Harrison recovered quickly, moving to less sensitive topics. "Understood, Phoenix. Your performance tonight has been noted by several interested parties. Expect to receive new assignment orders within the next 48 hours." Phoenix nodded without visible emotion. "Thank you, sir. Will there be anything else?" "Negative, dismissed." As the debriefing broke up, Kane found himself walking beside Phoenix toward the officer quarters. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful for a place where people tried to kill each other on a regular basis. "New assignment orders," Kane commented. "Moving on already." Phoenix shrugged, adjusting her flight bag on her shoulder. "Military life, Reaper. You go where you're needed when you're needed." "Must get lonely, always moving from assignment to assignment." Phoenix stopped walking, turning to face Kane with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Loneliness is a luxury, Reaper. When you're focused on the mission, personal considerations become secondary." There was something in her tone that suggested extensive experience with isolation and temporary assignments. Kane recognized the mindset. He'd seen it in long-term special operations personnel who'd spent years moving between classified assignments without permanent relationships or stable locations. "How long have you been doing this?" Kane asked. Phoenix resumed walking, considering her answer carefully. "Longer than most people would believe, Reaper. Sometimes I feel like I've been flying combat missions my entire adult life." Kane was about to respond when his attention was caught by something that changed everything he thought he knew about Phoenix. As she adjusted her flight suit, the fabric shifted enough to reveal a tattoo on her forearm, not unusual in military personnel, but this particular tattoo made Kane's blood run cold. It was a small, precisely detailed phoenix rising from flames, but surrounding it were symbols that Kane recognized from classified briefings. Unit designations from operations that officially didn't exist, conducted by personnel whose identities were protected at the highest levels of government. Phoenix noticed his stare and quickly adjusted her sleeve to cover the tattoo, but it was too late. Kane had seen enough to understand that he'd been flying with someone whose operational background was far more extensive and classified than anyone had briefed him. "Phoenix," Kane said quietly, "we need to talk." Phoenix met his gaze steadily. "No, Reaper, we really don't." But Kane's mind was already racing, connecting details that suddenly made sense. The redacted service record, the impossible flying skills, the casual familiarity with classified operations. Phoenix wasn't just another pilot, she was something else entirely. The next 48 hours passed with unusual quiet around the base. Phoenix maintained her normal routine, pre-flight inspections, equipment maintenance, physical training. But Kane noticed increased attention from base security and several meetings with personnel he didn't recognize. Official visitors in civilian clothes who carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of intelligence operatives. Kane tried to approach Phoenix several times, but she seemed to anticipate his movements, always managing to be elsewhere when he arrived at her usual locations. It wasn't avoidance exactly, but rather the practiced situational awareness of someone accustomed to maintaining operational security. On the second evening, Kane was reviewing mission reports in his quarters when Rodriguez knocked on his door. The younger operator entered with obvious excitement, carrying a tablet displaying drone footage from their recent mission. "Reaper, you need to see this," Rodriguez said, setting the tablet on Kane's desk. "I was reviewing the mission footage for my after-action report, and I found something interesting." The drone footage showed the extraction sequence from an overhead perspective, clearly displaying Phoenix's aircraft and the team's movement to the landing zone. Rodriguez advanced the footage to the moment when Phoenix was providing covering fire from the cockpit. "Watch this," Rodriguez said, enhancing the image resolution. Kane leaned forward, studying the enhanced footage. Phoenix was clearly visible in the cockpit, her flight suit sleeve rolled up as she operated the aircraft's weapon systems. The tattoo on her forearm was clearly visible in the high-definition imagery. "Jesus Christ," Kane whispered, recognizing additional details he'd missed during their brief encounter. The tattoo wasn't just unit insignia. It included operational ribbons and campaign markers that represented conflicts spanning nearly 2 decades. Operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and several locations that Kane couldn't immediately identify. The kind of operational history that belonged to someone who'd been conducting classified missions since before Rodriguez had enlisted. "Reaper, this doesn't make sense," Rodriguez said, pointing at specific elements of the tattoo. "Some of these campaign markers are from operations that were conducted 8, 10, even 12 years ago. Phoenix can't be more than 30 years old." Kane studied the imagery more carefully, his mind processing implications that grew more disturbing with each detail. If the tattoo was accurate, Phoenix had been conducting combat operations since she was barely out of her teens, the kind of operational tempo that suggested she was something much more significant than a standard naval aviator. Rodriguez, who else has seen this footage? Just me, Reaper. I pulled it directly from the classified server for my report. Kane made a decision that would haunt him for years. Delete this footage from your report. Don't mention the tattoo to anyone. Don't discuss Phoenix's background with other personnel. Rodriguez stared at him. Reaper, what the hell is going on? Kane looked at the younger operator, weighing how much truth Rodriguez could handle. Some people in the military have backgrounds that are protected for reasons of national security. Phoenix is one of those people. The less we know about her operational history, the safer everyone involved will be. But those campaign markers. Forget what you saw, Rodriguez. That's an order. Rodriguez nodded reluctantly, but Kane could see the questions multiplying behind his eyes. The truth was, Kane had more questions than answers, and he was beginning to suspect that Phoenix's story was classified at levels far above his clearance. That night, Kane lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind churning through possibilities that grew more complex with each consideration. Phoenix had demonstrated flying skills that suggested extensive combat experience, carried herself with the confidence of a veteran operator, and possessed knowledge of classified operations that indicated access to the highest levels of military intelligence. But the timeline didn't make sense. The campaign markers Rodriguez had identified spanned conflicts that would require nearly 20 years of continuous combat operations. Unless Phoenix had started her military career as a teenager, the math simply didn't work. Kane was still wrestling with these contradictions when his secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The sender was identified only as BLACKWATER Actual, the mission commander for their recent operation. Reaper, report to Secure COMMUNICATONS facility immediately. Classification level, Cosmic, acknowledge. Kane stared at the message, his blood running cold. Cosmic was a classification level he'd encountered only twice in his career, both times involving operations that officially didn't exist. Whatever he was about to learn about Phoenix, it was protected by the highest levels of government secrecy. He dressed quickly and made his way across the base to the secure communications facility, his mind racing through possibilities, none of which he wanted to contemplate. The secure communications facility was a nondescript building that could have housed anything from administrative offices to equipment storage. Kane approached the guard post, presented his identification, and submitted to biometric verification that confirmed his identity and clearance level. "Colonel Kane," said the duty officer, a young lieutenant whose bearing suggested intelligence training, "you're expected in Conference Room Alpha. Please follow me." The conference room contained a single table, 2 chairs, and communication equipment that Kane recognized as the most advanced systems available to military intelligence. A large monitor dominated one wall, currently displaying a classified header that made Kane's stomach tighten. "Please be seated, Colonel Kane. Your briefing will begin momentarily." Kane sat down, his hands resting on the table in front of him, trying to maintain professional composure despite growing apprehension. The door opened to admit a woman in civilian clothes, whose bearing immediately identified her as senior intelligence personnel. "Colonel Kane, I'm Director Sarah Chen, Defense Intelligence Agency. Thank you for responding so quickly to our request." Chen sat across from Kane, activating the secure communication system with practiced efficiency. The monitor flickered to life, displaying a file header that made Kane's blood run cold. "Operation Phoenix Rising, Cosmic Level Classification." "Colonel Kane, what I'm about to share with you is protected under the highest levels of national security classification. Unauthorized disclosure carries penalties up to and including life imprisonment. Do you understand? Kane nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. Yes, ma'am. Excellent. Colonel Kane, your recent mission partner, Lieutenant Commander Cassandra Voss, is not exactly what she appears to be. The monitor displayed a photograph of Phoenix, but the timestamp showed it was taken